We're not out there fighting anything other than crime.
We see stuff that nobody should have to
Put
see.
your hands back! Hands it back! Hands it back! Go!
Get out of it, Mel. Get out of it! Get out of it!
Don't move! Don't move!
George 31, erect out.
Don't go! Don't go! Don't go!
Put it in paper. You're going to jail. Where else do you think you're going?
You're listening to The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide. Great to have you back for what should be another fun episode of the Mike the New Haven podcast, episode 367. I mistakenly ran that introduction, of course, the other day for Friday's show. I'm entitled to a gaffe every now and then, but that wasn't The Beat, but it was episode 366 of the Mike the New Haven podcast, and that featured former NYPD Assistant Commissioner Kevin O'Connor, who I was very fortunate to have a great conversation with covering his career. That man did 35 years in total in the New York City Police Department, and we were able to talk about the many different roles that he held over those 35 years. That culminated, of course, in him retiring as an assistant commissioner not too long ago in 2023. This is The Beat, however, and it is volume 19 of this miniseries, which started on a whim a couple of years ago, and is soon to be closing in on 20 volumes. And again, the Bob Starkman tree reigns supreme on the Mike the New Haven podcast. He started this a couple of years ago. That led to Alex Alonso. That led to our dear late friend Miles Son. That led to Toby Roche. That led to Lorenzo Toledo. Of course, Joe Pistone, Ralph Friedman, and tonight's guest, who we'll introduce momentarily. You know the drill by now. If there's a question you guys have, should you be tuning in from Twitter or X, whatever you call it these days, YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, fire away, and I'll be sure to highlight it at the appropriate time. In the meantime, of course, I do want to run an ad from my friend, who I'm sure is not resting on this day, even though he should be. He's out there working, knowing him, and that is a retired NYPD detective and private investigator extraordinaire, the one, the only, Bill Ryan. The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast. Billy, of course, is not only a good friend on the air, he's a good friend off the air, and he's really one of the backbones of this show. As you know, Tales from the Boom Room, or NYPD Bomb Squad miniseries, got started because of him. So always good to see Billy on this program. He'll always be tied at the hip with me, and as is Bob Starkman, because like I said earlier, Bob Starkman is a big part of the reason why my next guest and I are going to be having a conversation tonight. And who's my next guest? Well, 31-year veteran of federal law enforcement whose career has taken him from the waters off Miami to the embassies of Europe and everywhere in between, as him and I were talking about just now off the air. He's a decorated U.S. Customs and Homeland Security Investigation Special Agent. He's worked undercover on high-seas smuggling cases, tracked terrorist activity in South Florida, and helped pioneer new methods of cross-border interdiction in the Pacific Northwest. He's commanded vessels, led tactical teams, built investigative task forces from the ground up, and even helped stand up the nation's response protocol to bioterrorism threats, which we'll dive into as well. And after retiring from federal service, his commitment to service continued, most personally and powerfully, of course, when he became a Gold Star father, unfortunately, losing his son, Marine Lance Corporal Jack Ryan Ostrovsky, in a 2020 training accident. So through advocacy and action, he's honored that legacy, which we'll also talk about every day, and that for this volume 19 of The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide, retired U.S. Customs Special Agent Pete Ostrovsky. Mr. Ostrovsky, pleasure to have you on the program. Welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on, Mike.
Thank you for being here. We've been following each other on social media for quite a bit, so it's nice to finally link up and do this. And you were explaining your background to me off the air, which I was just fascinated by. So for those listening in and tuning in, and hello to all you once again, fill the audience in on what you were just telling me about your background.
Yeah, so, obviously Ostrovsky, that's a Russian last name. And I'll back up. I'll back way up. My grandfather, my Russian grandfather, left Siberia during the Russian Revolution and went to China. And he was living in a Russian community. Met my grandmother. My father was born in Shanghai. and he ended up growing up in Tianjin, China. In 1948, my father and his parents left China and went to Havana, Cuba. And my father went to high school in Havana, and he eventually met my mother, who was a Cuban, and they got married. And at the time when my grandfather and grandmother and my father entered Cuba, they got Cuban citizenship. So when my folks came to the United States in 1960, they were Cuban citizens, and I'm essentially a Cuban American, believe it or not.
And which led to, again, such an interesting and diverse background, because like I told you off air, and I'll tell you the same thing to the audience watching on the air, never judge a book by its cover. You would think a 6'3", blonde hair, blue eyes, like you were telling me off the air, guy with the last name Ostrovsky would never by any definition be a Cuban American, but by definition, as you told me, you are. So, again, a diverse background that upon first glance, nobody would have guessed.
Yeah, and who would have thought that my first language was Spanish in our home, because my mother did not speak English very well. So we spoke Spanish first and English second. So yeah, it's been an interesting way to grow up,
Oh, I can imagine. Before I get into your law enforcement career, what's interesting about you, and we're talking with retired Special Agent Pete Ostrovsky here on the Mike the New Haven podcast, volume 19 of the Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide, is you were an athlete. You played soccer. You ran cross country. Before law enforcement, was there ever a thought about trying to be a pro athlete?
No, not at all. I was an age group swimmer when I was a child, from like age 6 to age 14. But I ended up going to Chaminade High School in Hollywood, Florida, which is a private Marianist high school. They did not have a swim team. So at that point, it was a matter of looking for, a new physical activity, and I ran cross country and long distance and track, and ended up playing soccer. Soccer in the 70s in the United States was kind of like a new thing. I can tell you that I wasn't very good. I definitely know I wasn't very good, but it's what kept me busy when I was outside of the classroom in high school.
And it's a good foundation because it keeps you out of trouble. And even if you're not the star of the field, it gives you good discipline. It obviously teaches you camaraderie, teaches you teamwork, and all the skills that you need, not only to be successful on the field, but obviously ultimately in life. And that played a central role in what would come later. So it's interesting. Your relationship with Florida, particularly Miami, it stretches back a long time, but one of the major steps that led you to where you would go law enforcement wise began originally as a student at the U. And shout out to the Hurricanes. They just had a big win over Notre Dame yesterday. So all my Hurricane fans are happy about that. But originally you went there, and your major, or your background that you were looking to go into, at least study wise, was health and fitness. So going to the U, especially during that time where we're talking cocaine cowboys era Miami. So it's a wild time. The party scene is quite prevalent. What was getting your education down there like, and how difficult was it to stay on the straight and narrow considering all the madness around you?
Yeah, so I was fortunate that my father, I'd call him an international businessman. He used to sell and export radio broadcast equipment to Latin America and the Caribbean. So he was able to afford to send my sister and I to, private high schools and then private education at the University of Miami. My sister was 3 years ahead of me. I really kind of followed in her footsteps. I don't know why. I just kind of did, because it was just the easy thing to do. But then I was at the University of Miami, pursuing my degree. My sophomore year, or my sophomore summer, I started working on the Miami Beach Patrol as a lifeguard on the old South Beach before it was, the Art Deco district was like revitalized. And that's where I started to see marine law enforcement boats and units, whether it was the Coast Guard or the Florida Marine Patrol, which now is known as the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission. It's different. It's got a name change now, and then I'd see, back then it was Metrodade Police, their marine unit. And so I started to take an interest in what is this job, these police officers on boats. I mean, that certainly is like more exciting than what I'm doing sitting in a lifeguard stand, on Miami Beach. And certainly it seemed to be more interesting and exciting than, eventually going, using my health and fitness management degree to work like in a health club type setting. So, and all that said, at the same time, you have the layer of, it's like the Miami Vice era, the Cocaine Cowboys, all that stuff's in the Miami Herald. It's on the nightly news. So you had this this stream of imagery and stories, like in front of me, and then I just kind of like realized that I want to be a part of that somehow. I want to get involved in that. So that's when I started to look at law enforcement as a career.
And you did ride-alongs too, which that's only going to serve the appetite even more. So seeing that up close, especially back then where it's a very different time to be a police officer, not just in Miami, but countrywide. I imagine, any sort of interest you had, that cemented it.
Yeah, I did some ride-alongs with the Metro-Dade Police Department and in some of the rougher parts of town. And I kind of, my understanding was that to work on the Metro-Dade Police Marine Unit, you had to be on patrol first. Metro-Dade is a huge department in South Florida, and they have all kinds of different specialized units. So you need to do your time, and then eventually you can work your way into or one of those specialized units. So, I was an applicant with Metro-Dade. I was an applicant with the Florida Marine Patrol. At the same time, I took the Treasury Enforcement Agent exam, because by taking that exam, you could essentially get your score and see if you're eligible to work for Secret Service, Customs, IRS, CID, or ATF, because they were all under the Treasury Department at that time. Treasury Department was like also on the radar screen because, there had been the assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan. So the Secret Service was visible and out there. But really, when you say visible and out there, it's what you read in the paper and what you saw on the TV news. This is prior to the internet. There weren't really a lot of books written about all of these different things. So it's really what you saw on the news, and then the fictionalized stuff that you saw on the TV shows, whether it was the Sunday night movie of the week, or you're watching Miami Vice, or you're watching some other Aaron Spelling police series that's on television. I mean, that's what kind of formed my vision of that world or that potential career for myself. And then add that to the fact that, lifeguarding is kind of boring. And so you do a lot of daydreaming when you're out there. And so you put all that together, and I developed the interest and the desire to get into law enforcement on my own. Yeah.
On top of that, too, you were an EMT. So that's, an added boost in and of itself, where not a lot of more police officers now, I should say, have that certification. But back then it was rarer. So if you wanted to go local, which you didn't, ultimately, it was something that only added to your hireability factor. So I guess, listen, you took multiple federal exams, and as you just talked about, or applied for multiple federal agencies, I should say. But just to go back a second, why the jump to federal? Not that there's anything wrong with that, as opposed to wanting to start local. Was it an opportunity to do more, see more?
Well, I think it was the Secret Service thing, frankly. That was like the federal interest. I saw the customs boats, but then again, I did not have an understanding. How do you get to work on those U.S. customs boats? My understanding was that it's like over at Metro-Dade Police. It's a specialized unit. You work your way towards that. So, I took the Treasury Enforcement Agent exam. I got a 71.5. A passing score is a 70. So I did not think that I would ever get a call from any federal agency with such a low score, because with the state and local agencies, you had to get a very high score, right? High 90s to be like on the desirable, eligibles list to get hired. So I kind of discounted the whole federal thing, although I took the exam. I also went and participated in the Florida Marine Patrol assessment, which you'd have to go to Tallahassee, Florida, to the State Police Academy. It was like a physical fitness thing. It was a run, it was a swim, it was push-ups, sit-ups. They had a panel interview that you had to go through, and then they had an essay question that you had to, a surprise essay that you had to write. And so when I went to that Florida Marine Patrol assessment, I basically ranked second in all the physical stuff. There's one other guy that beat me out. So I knew, okay, I'm up there, in that list of eligibles. But when it came time for that to write the essay, it was my great fortune that the surprise essay question was, why would it be beneficial for a law enforcement agency to have a health and fitness program? Well, that was the premise of my entire academic program at the University of Miami, because that program is geared towards like these corporate fitness programs. So I completely aced the essay. And then I went and did the panel interview, walked away with a good feeling from that. And so, it was just kind of a waiting game at that point, because, we're talking snail mail. Notifications would come via the mail, and it was just a waiting game to see, who was going to notify me of next steps or a job offer. I have to say that on the Metro-Dade police process, I didn't proceed beyond the polygraph, and I'll tell you why. Because one of the polygraph questions was, have you ever used anabolic steroids before? And during college, I had. My roommate was a weightlifter, bodybuilder, and I was racing and doing triathlons. And for a period of time, I had used some. So when I admitted to that during the polygraph for the Metro-Dade police, the polygrapher literally was shocked. He stopped. He turned off the machine and he goes, okay, we're finished. And what I was told was that was an immediate exit out of their hiring process, because the context of prior to that, there was this big Miami River cops scandal where there were all these Miami PD cops that were robbing drug traffickers, and there had been some homicides related to that. And a lot of those officers were using steroids. And essentially, there was no law enforcement agency in South Florida that wanted to have anybody using steroids ever again, or hire somebody that had. So that's how my application into the Metro-Dade police, abruptly ended. But much to my surprise, in early January of 1987, I'm sitting in the lifeguard stand, and one of our lieutenants calls me over the radio and tells me to call this customs special agent at the following phone number. And, literally it's, take a pencil out of our first aid kit, writing the number down on a box of bandages. And during my afternoon break, going back to a payphone and making a phone call. And it was a special agent from the Customs Service telling me to come in for an interview. And when is that interview? Well, it's tomorrow at 11 a.m. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm calling in sick at the beach tomorrow to go to this interview. And really the rest is history. I went and did that interview, and I was kind of surprised that they didn't ask me. It was more like background questions. Have I ever used illicit drugs? Am I wanting to? Have I ever been for the overthrow of the U.S. government? Like all these template boilerplate questions, and I walked out of there, and 2 weeks later, I got a letter saying that I was hired by the Customs Service as a GS7 customs investigator which I was like, okay, well, I kind of get it. Customs, I'll be investigating, but I didn't know specifically what I'd be doing initially.
And that would come later. Before we even get to that component, though, which was very interesting, there's always the training part. It doesn't matter what career in law enforcement you're trying to pursue, no matter how long or short it may be, rather, there's going to be some form of an academy. So what did your training consist of besides the obvious, and how long was it?
So the Customs Service sends you to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center back then in Glencoe, Georgia, Brunswick, Georgia, Southeast Georgia. And you go to 8 weeks of the Treasury Department's Criminal Investigator Training Program, where you learn all about federal law, federal criminal procedure. And then you also, there's firearms training, there's driver training, there's how to process evidence, how to roll fingerprints, just like the basics of being a criminal investigator. So anybody that was entering a criminal investigator position in the Treasury Department, Secret Service, Customs, ATF, IRS, you go to that school, along with a host of other federal agencies that don't have their own academies. So let's say you're going to be an investigator for an inspector general agency, which they're typically very small. You would go to that basic course. So that was 8 weeks. And then after that, we went to the Customs basic investigator school, where we learned more about customs law and the customs mission. And, we continued our firearms training, but training with the firearms that we would be issued, and being assessed during these different practical exercises that were more geared towards the customs mission, interdicting smugglers and those sorts of investigations, conducting search warrants at residences, etc. So that was another 8 weeks. So in total, it's 16 weeks before you graduate.
And I'm sure it taught you a lot. I'm sure it prepared you for a lot, because this is serious business. Even before you became a special agent in 1989, just the preparation to be an investigator. It's not just of course, understanding of the law and the component of the books, the physical component. I'm sure if there was one, you didn't struggle with that. But you came out of that ready to go, excited, I'm sure. And during that time period, 87 to 89, talk about the interdiction work that was done, because there was a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, and just to back up, when I was at the academy during training, I took it very seriously, because this was my shot. This was like my golden ticket, and I was not going to screw it up. It didn't surprise me that I came out of there with a physical fitness award for my class. Although I was surprised when I got like the best all around, or the honor graduate award for the highest scores for like in academics, and then firearms training, in addition to physical fitness. So I took it very seriously, because I didn't want to screw up my shot. And I came back to the Miami office, and before I went to the academy, so when I reported, I was in the Miami office for 2 weeks before I went to the 16-week academy. And I found out that I was going to work on the boats, which is exactly what I wanted to do. I mean, I envisioned I wanted to be or have this marine law enforcement career. So I felt doubly that I won the lottery, because here I was coming in the front door, and they're like, you're going to be working on the boats. And I'm like, great, because that's exactly what I want to do. So when I got back from the academy, I was assigned to one of our shifts. They ran a 24/7 operation on the boats. I was basically on the midnight shift, worked from 11 p.m. to 7 in the morning, which, for somebody that worked as a lifeguard during the day, it took some getting used to working at night. But at the same time, I was very excited to have that job. And I fell into a very good group. My supervisor, by the name of Joe Goulet, was an incredible supervisor. He was like a late Vietnam era Green Beret, but he was like a mariner, and he knew everything about operating boats, sailing, navigation, So it was really, I fell into the right place to pursue that Marine law enforcement career that I wanted. And Joe really was lighthearted, but dead serious about our work. And I always say that he kind of perfected on-the-job training and ball busting all into one, because it just made for a great learning environment. And I really, everything I know about maritime, I learned from him.
I love how it came full circle for you, because whereas unfortunately you weren't able to get onto Metro Date at the time due to your honesty, which is commendable, because that's not an easy thing to be honest about, as you disclosed earlier. Ultimately you were rewarded in the long run because you were honest, and it didn't get you that job, but it got you this job, and it got you right where you wanted to be originally. So it really did work out. It paved the way for much of what would come later. And before I even get to being promoted in '89, you mentioned, of course, learning from a guy like that who had a background like that. What was the moment during those early interdiction operations, especially with some of the foreign operations that were being run too, where you said, holy crap, it's real now. This is what I'm in for, in a good way, of course.
It got really real 2 weeks out of the academy, because the boat crew that I was assigned to on the midnight shift one night, we responded to a report from the North Miami Police Marine Unit at Haulover Inlet, which is in North Miami, about 15 miles north of where our office is in the Miami River, that there were several go-fast boats had tried to come into the inlet, and they were dumping marijuana bales in the water, and they were being chased by this local police officer. And the local police officer had chased them offshore out of the inlet, and we responded up there. And we got the quick thumbnail from that police officer as to the boat that he chased, got the description, and in the dead of night, this is like at 0200, 2 a.m., we started pursuing what was a radar target by our Blue Lightning Operations Center that had all of these radars set up on condominium buildings along the beach in South Florida. They had the boat as a radar target going eastbound towards the Bahamas, towards specifically Bimini. And so we were in the blind darkness, just trying to chase down this radar target. And we knew, or what I learned from my partners, because I was new, was that the bad guys, these smugglers, were going to probably go somewhere and dump the load, and then they were going to continue to run away from the dumped load in the ocean to another location, probably to wash down their boat from all of the burlap debris from, like, if it's marijuana bales or baled kilograms of cocaine, that they would go somewhere to try to wash down their boat, so that if they were stopped by law enforcement, there would be no evidence on the boat that they were the boat that had the load of narcotics. So we were continuing eastbound. At a certain point, the Blue Lightning Operations Center said, we don't have the radar target anymore. They're off radar. And we continued. And then as the sun started coming up that morning, a Coast Guard helicopter overflew us from west to east. So we're like, okay, he must be responding to this situation, this pursuit as well. And we came down off plane and shut down our engines, because we wanted to see if we could hear the smugglers' engines and key off of that. And as it became lighter and lighter, we decided, after having a conversation amongst ourselves, that we just turn around and go back to Haulover Inlet, because we were probably at that point 35 miles offshore. And we figured that on our way back, we may run into a debris field of all the floating marijuana bales, and then we just recover the marijuana and at least make a seizure of the marijuana. And as we were getting ready to turn around, we looked to the south, And there they were, dead in the water, about a mile south of us. We could see the entire side of their boat profile. We could see the color, white with a blue stripe. You could see it in the distance. And one of the other things that could have happened was that they broke down or they ran out of fuel. So we headed towards them, and they took off back up on plane, and we continued to chase them. The Coast Guard helicopter must have seen the pursuit, and we chased them into Bahamian waters. We chased them into Bimini Harbor, which is definitely, foreign territory. We're in a foreign country now. And as we were approaching the harbor entrance, one of our customs boats that was assigned to work with our Bahamian counterparts, which was the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, the RBDF.
Yep.
We see them responding in from the north side of Bimini. They cut across this shoal and put themselves kind of in front of the pursuit. And so we're like, okay, now we have backup, and we continued chasing the smugglers. And all of a sudden we see this 25-foot white Mako center console boat come out of the harbor, and he tries to block our other boat, get in front of them. And they actually have a collision there in the harbor entrance. And all I remember seeing was our customs boat that was assigned to the Bahamas was up on top of this Mako, completely up on top of them. And our customs boat, which was a Blue Thunder, which is kind of a famous boat, both of its outdrives were out of the water, and you can see the propeller spinning. The smugglers that we were chasing essentially continued fleeing. They went around the collision. We went around the collision. It was my boss, Joe Goulet, and another guy that was on temporary assignment in the Bahamas. And eventually the smugglers stopped, and we came up alongside them, and I and Matt Leary went on board, and we took the two smugglers into custody. That being said, we're in a foreign country now. We look over at our boat that's assigned to the Bahamas, and they don't have a Bahamian officer with them. They had responded from our base in the middle of the night, and they didn't pick up a Bahamian officer. So literally, we had conducted a law enforcement action in a foreign country without any authorization whatsoever. So the decision was made that we would. Oh, the other thing was our smugglers. There was nothing on board their boat. They had dumped. They had successfully dumped the load. But as we had predicted, they had been in the process of washing down the boat when we spotted them, because this smuggler boat, the brand back then it was called Midnight Express. They were large center console boats, 37 foot, with 4 outboard engines. They also had these what we call a raw water washdown system. So essentially, they have a pump that they can pump water on board, and they have a hose. And what we found was the hose was pumping water, and there was like a blue nylon brush, like on a pole that they must have been using to scrub down the boat when we spotted them. So, but they had successfully dumped the load. So the decision was made that we would just take the two smugglers back to Miami, and we did that. We took them back, and then, much to our surprise, upon our arrival back at the customs house, the day shift, the Coast Guard, the Florida Marine Patrol, North Miami Police, they had recovered part of the load that was found floating in the ocean. They had recovered a second boat that had been abandoned off the beach in Haulover, that had nobody on board, but it was completely loaded, and stacked up on the dock was 12,000 pounds of marijuana and marijuana bales. So for the day, I guess, we were the heroes, but in reality, we had, violated law in the Bahamas.
And I had no idea the border was that close. I have to plead ignorance on that one. I mean, it's good to have partners in that agency. I didn't realize how close, at least from a maritime perspective, that the border was.
Yeah. So, the Bahamas is 47 nautical miles from Miami. And, our customs waters extends out 12 miles.
Yeah.
So the state limit is 3 miles, but then customs waters is 12 miles.
Mhm.
So yeah, everything's relatively close. And the Bahamas, and specifically the Bimini Island chain, where we chase these guys into, has been a staging location and a waypoint for smugglers for decades and decades.
I can see why.
Yeah.
Peter Ostrovsky is our guest here at the Mike the New Haven podcast. As I mentioned, he's a retired agent out of the HSI, was in customs pre its merger with Border Patrol in 2003. 31-year career in law enforcement for this volume 19 of The Beat. So that brings us into 89, Macon Special Agent. I mean, this was, again, one of several landmark achievements over the course of your career. You had done a lot. That story alone is just scratching the surface of what happened in those 2 years. And this would envelop 8 years of your career, from 89 up until 1997. So now the stakes change a little bit. The mission's still the same, but as far as the purview of what you can do, that's changed. So just tell me about adjusting to that rank and some of the early operations you took on as a new special agent at that time.
Yeah, well, I was sorry to leave the boats, because after that pursuit, the rest of my time on the boats, I had a lot of underway time. I ended up going back to the Bahamas. I did lots of joint ops with our Bahamian counterparts, lots of activity, but no other bus. So it was kind of a dismal time. It didn't meet my desires for my time on the boat. So when I left the boats in 1989 to go over to an investigative group, I was kind of walking away disappointed with my time on the boats, although, I became a seasoned mariner and definitely, a decent marine law enforcement officer. But so I left the boats. I went over to our exports investigative group, which basically investigates illegal exports of U.S. munitions list items, controlled commodities. They investigate violations of U.S. embargoes and sanctions. So it was kind of like a white collar group. And the only reason I went to that group, or I was brought into that group, was because they needed a Spanish speaker. So it was like, you're here because we need a Spanish speaker. You'll learn what we do by doing, And so it took me a bit to get used to that, but I found my niche, which was work in illegal exports of firearms, smuggling of firearms. Mainly back then, a lot of the firearms were being smuggled to South America, into the Caribbean. The guns going into South America were either going to the traffickers or being smuggled by people that are trying to protect themselves from traffickers down there in South America. So I got into that. I fell into this one case where the Dutch Criminal Intelligence Service came to us, and they were investigating some Cuban Americans from Miami that were providing firearms and ammunition and training to some rebels in Suriname. Suriname's a former Dutch colony in the northeast part of South America. So they were investigating these individuals in Suriname, and then I started conducting like a collateral investigation here in the United States, and I was able to identify several of them and some planes that were involved with these guys, and it was kind of fortuitous that one of them got busted in Aruba with a Beech 18, which is like a tail dragger airplane, and it was loaded with ammunition of all various calibers, and it had 2 firearms that were secreted up underneath the instrument panel. And so when we became aware of that, I ended up going to Aruba and meeting with the law enforcement down there and conducting traces on those firearms. And the firearms traced back to the pilot. He had bought them at a Miami gun shop, and we were able to do a successful prosecution of him. And it was interesting because that plane, back then, this is before digital cameras. We're talking like little 110 and 35 millimeter cameras. What else was on that plane? Well, on that plane were sets of photographs that I guess he was bringing down to the rebels to give to the rebels,
Jesus.
which were photographs that documented their previous activities. So they had photographs of these Cuban American guys conducting weapons training for the rebels and conducting explosives training for them. Photographs of them in towns that were, attacked by them in Suriname. And we were able to successfully match all of the ammunition that we found on the planes with all of the firearms depicted in those photographs. So it made for a decent, airtight case against that smuggler pilot who had the firearms. So I kind of cut my teeth on that case, and then I also another case kind of came my way, which was back then. That was the Carter, not the Carter era. This was a Bill Clinton era.
Yeah, 93 around there.
Yeah, so there was a lot of stuff going on with Cuba, meaning the Office of Foreign Assets Control and the Treasury Department had all these rules where basically you could not travel to Cuba or you could not do any business in Cuba without a license. You couldn't provide travel services even to persons that were going to Cuba for humanitarian reasons without a license from the Treasury Department. And a case came our way from the Miami Police Department where there was a suspected travel agency on Southwest 8th Street, Calle Ocho, that was selling, that was not registered with the Treasury Department, and they were selling unlicensed travel services to Cuba. So I teamed up with Alex Alonso and Miles Son, and Alex was going to be the undercover agent to go in and purchase travel services from this travel agency. And, he was able to do so. We're talking old school back then for all of the old school detectives and feds that are watching and listening. Alex was using a Nagra recorder, which is a small reel-to-reel inside of like a man purse to record the audio with the target. And he was able to buy some of these travel services. But then what we ended up realizing was that besides doing unlicensed travel services, this guy was ripping off like 60% of his customers. And so we were able to do a search warrant on the business and identify this, what was also a large scale fraud, against all of these Cuban Americans and that were trying to go back to Cuba for humanitarian reasons. So, probably 6 out of 10 customers were defrauded by him. And we did a federal prosecution on that. But that was the first time I got to work with Alex and Miles.
There'll be several more to follow, of course. And that's the thing to keep in mind, too. It's when you talk about customs, a lot of people automatically, and I can understand why, go towards things like, okay, getting illegal firearms off the streets and off the seas, and also, too, getting illegal narcotics off the streets and off the seas by extension. But it's a lot of work like this, too. And it's cases like that where you're able to really track individuals like this down who are defrauding those with innocent intentions. That has to make it extra rewarding and remind you why you're so glad to do the job you do.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to stumble into, once you get in the door and once you do a search warrant and you've got all of somebody's documents and records. And really, and what you're saying, Mike, describes the wide breadth of the legacy customs mission. It's very wide. The contraband mission, the money laundering mission, some of the national security stuff that we get involved in, and that is carried forward in the modern day, Homeland Security investigations. So you just never know what you're going to get into when you're looking at some kind of transnational or international crime, or cross-border crime. Yeah.
And international situations or international tensions, whatever they may be at the top, kind of factor into the work too. You mentioned a lot was going on with Cuba at this time. A lot was going on with terrorism too. The focus, I think, after the Trade Center was hit the first time in 1993, even though narcotics was still the name of the game, getting that off the streets and off the seas, the focus, even before 9/11, went a lot towards counterterrorism as well. And that was part of your duties. And even in the mid-90s, it was still a concern for major cities. And it came home to roost originally with that bombing at the Trade Center in February of 93. So just tell me about getting involved with the warrants team, special response team. And also, again, the JTTF has been around a long time. People think of it more after 9/11, but the JTTF was around then. So tell me about your involvement with that during that time period.
Yeah. So just by meeting other cops, local detectives, and realized that the Joint Terrorism Task Force based at FBI Miami in North Miami Beach back then, their Joint Terrorism Task Force was investigating these anti-Castro militants that are in Miami. There was several different groups around Miami where they had training camps, and they aspired to one day overthrow Fidel Castro by force through violence. And at the same time, in Miami, every now and again, there would be like a bombing of like a business that was like sympathetic to the Castro government, allegedly, or not. So there was a lot going on, like on both sides of the equation. So I got involved working over at JTTF, first on a part-time basis, but then on a full-time basis. And really what our mission was to deter and avert these attacks that were being conducted by some of these anti-Castro militant groups, because essentially what they were doing, they had all the right to have a training camp and shoot firearms and train themselves. But what they started to do was conducting what we coined were aquatic drive-by shootings of like Cuban tourist hotels. When I say Cuban, meaning located in Cuba, a lot of the tourist hotels along the Cuban beaches are actually owned by European firms and European concerns. Yep. And so what some of these groups were doing was they would get in like a go-fast boat, launch from the Florida Keys, like 3 guys with 3 rifles, ammunition, flak vests, and helmets, and they would go off the beaches, these tourist hotel beaches, and they would shoot at the hotels, and they would shoot at the beachgoers. And in their minds, these militant groups, they felt that if they could ruin or precipitate, if they could ruin the tourism economy in Cuba, it could precipitate the downfall or the fall of Castro. But that being said, the U.S. government didn't want to have U.S. persons essentially doing that activity. So our job was to deter them or avert these attacks. Really wasn't to arrest them, but it was more about dismantling their ability to do so. Because what we found was there was it was like a cyclical process. These groups would like raise funds, they would buy armaments and boats, they would go do one of these aquatic drive-by shootings of a tourist hotel, and then with that success that they could tout, they could raise more funds to do it again. So we were just trying to break that cycle of activity, because the Clinton administration did not want, these kinds of unsanctioned activities by U.S. persons. So, I found myself in a good position to use our customs authority, our outbound enforcement authority, to, along with my partners, specifically Miami PD, Metro-Dade police detectives, and our FBI agents, to interdict them, whether it was at the boat ramp or driving down the highway with a load of guns to points unknown to go launch an attack, or even after a successful attack upon their return to the United States, with their boat and their arms and ammunition. So the Customs Service found itself in a good position to, take action against them. And it was because we had this, what I call like this beautiful law, and that it's Title 22 U.S. Code, Section 401, that allowed us to seize arms and ammunition that were intended for illegal export, being illegally exported, or having previously been exported. So it put us really in the perfect position to take action against these groups and to, reduce their activities that the U.S. government did not want to happen at the time. Because essentially, all of your export controls, your U.S. embargoes and sanctions, they're all in furtherance of national security and U.S. foreign policy objectives. So really, that's where we found ourselves. It was the U.S. foreign policy at the time that we had a policy of restraint. The U.S. government was not doing anything with the Cubans, either against them or with them. So we certainly didn't want, when I say we, the U.S. government did not want U.S. persons taking their own actions that were unsanctioned.
Especially at this time that the war in the Balkans, or military action in the Balkans, was getting closer and closer, because the primary focus, at least 1996, 1997, 1998, into 1999, really, of the Clinton administration was taking down Slobodan Milosevic. So it was a headache, which is an operation in and of itself, ultimately a successful one by the Clinton administration, but it was a headache that certainly that administration did not need and did not want. Was Castro an enemy? Yes, he was, but was he an enemy in that moment? No. It kind of brings me back to something Phil Donahue said about Saddam Hussein many years ago. Saddam was a bastard, but he was our bastard, is the quote that Phil Donahue uttered about him. You can kind of say the same thing about Castro at that point in time.
Yeah, and there was a lot going on at that time, because we had the Brothers to the Rescue that were doing their patrols over the Straits of Florida looking for rafters.
Yeah.
The Cubans shot down 2 of the brothers' planes.
Yep.
We now know that we had Ana Montes. She was the Cuban spy in the DIA that was operating at that same time. So there was a lot of stuff going on between the United States and Cuba that maybe didn't grab that Balkans headline, that the rest of the world was aware about, but there was plenty going on, especially the fact that when the Brothers to the Rescue were shot down, essentially the brothers had been infiltrated by a Cuban spy, and he essentially caused that shoot down. So there was a lot going on.
Oh, a lot going on. And I saw one of your posts on that on Instagram a while ago, where one of the shootings, or one of the planes that was shot down, 4 people were killed. The intent was good, ultimately, but they paid with their lives due to what you said earlier, with that spy getting involved. And man, I tell you, again, I hate to say it, but that mission that these individuals were on with drive-by attacks, with how you described it, it almost sounds, it kind of does sound like a terrorism network, because that's what terrorism organizations do. They do these attacks, they get the funding, they have supporters rabid enough for the cause, get these funds up to keep doing more attacks. It doesn't matter what the intent is. If you define it, that's a terrorist organization in a nutshell, by definition.
Yeah, and I would say that at the time, we did not use that terminology on that group of people because of the nature of how South Florida is comprised and built up, So we just called them anti-Castro militants or anti-Castro groups. We didn't use the terrorist word. And, the these groups just felt that, well, hey, there was the Bay of Pigs invasion. Why can't we do our own? And the case was that the U.S. government did not want individual actors and groups doing those activities. That being said, my second uncle was involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion, and he was captured, and he ended up he was released when JFK did the big deal with Castro for the medicines and the foods, and so to say that I was in it, I've been in it like my whole life.
Of course. And again, the sentiment is understandable, but there's a meme that's gone around in the last few years, not on that, just in general, where when somebody does something with the right intention but not exactly the right execution, the meme is he's a little confused, but he's got the spirit. That was one of those instances where heart was in the right place, but the execution of it was of course a little misguided, to say the least.
Yeah, and you mentioned a word there, spirit, and I would say that when you look at customs special agents, and even now HSI special agents, whether you're in South Florida or the Southwest border or the Pacific Northwest, there has always been this strong spirit of finding a way, because of your desire, your will, your craftiness, to get your man, meaning to catch the smuggler. And I think that is the customs spirit. It's been in existence for a long time, and it still pervades today inside of HSI when they work these difficult cases against these transnational groups and cartels.
Absolutely. I did want to ask about this as a sidebar, because I've been trying to get this man on the show for years, and I'm going to. I don't care what it takes. But in between his stints as New York City Police Commissioner, people forget he also was the head of customs for a while. When Ray Kelly came in, I remember asking this to Alex, Miles, and Bob. People loved having Ray Kelly as their boss, and I just wanted to get your perspective on that. What was it like to work for him? Because people forget he was part of customs for a while. He did a great job.
Yeah, we were glad, because it's like we had like one of not just New York's finest, but America's finest leading our agency. So we were all very excited to have Ray Kelly as the commissioner. After my assignment on JTTF, I actually went back to the boats before I left South Florida, and I worked back in the Marine Investigations Group, which was 8 special agents and 8 boat drivers. And I remember having the opportunity to brief Commissioner Kelly about some of our activities in the boat program, because we had, it seemed like a couple times a month, we were involved in pursuits and with drug smugglers, again, coming out of Bimini, like they were back, and they were back in a big way. And some of these pursuits, there were collisions, there was gunfire. And I remember talking to Commissioner Kelly about what was going on. And I said, hey, I'm not trying to brag about it, but this is probably the most dangerous job in the Customs Service currently, what we're doing right now. Because again, it was all of these dead of night boat pursuits. And he savvied that, and I know that after I left, that group and other Marine enforcement groups in South Florida, got more resources, more equipment, more funding, because I think a person like Kelly recognized, the need and the gaps, and that we could fill the gaps.
Of course.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and he was there in total, if you combine his time as Secretary of the Treasury, 5 years. He got there in the summer of '96. He left at the conclusion of the Clinton administration in January of 2001. And honestly, I mean, granted, I don't know if the Bush administration would have kept him, but if not for his ambitions to return as New York City Police Commissioner, which he was ultimately successful in doing, and became the longest serving commissioner the NYPD's ever had at that, that was an assignment I'm sure he would have stayed in longer if he didn't have those ambitions, because anybody that knows him well, from what I've heard, he really enjoyed that was a sweet spot for him. And again, what's not to enjoy? You had a lot of hard working, driven agents working under you, and him being a former Marine himself, that was kind of his DNA and his makeup. Now, 1997, it's an interesting point in your career because you had done so much at that point in Miami. To that point, the only place you'd spent your career was in Florida. And now you go somewhere completely different, and that is Blaine, Washington. On one hand, new assignment, you do as you're told, you go and you make the best of it. Right? It's quite the paradox from the beaches of South Florida to Washington State. So tell me about going down there and just making the best of a brand new situation where you got to get used to the people you're working with, and they got to get used to you.
Yeah, I think I also had the spirit of my father that, here my dad grew up in China, lived in Cuba, came to the United States. He's a self-made man. And I kind of had that same spirit myself, that I wanted to really see other parts of the country and take advantage of opportunities in my career to do that. And I wasn't necessarily tied to Miami. So my wife and I had traveled a few times to the Pacific Northwest, and we kind of saw that all of that outdoor recreation, we wanted that to be like our backyard. And, I was essentially willing to start over again somewhere else because with 10 years of experience, with 10 years of Miami experience under my belt, I felt that I could do that elsewhere and be successful. And so it's funny, our special agent in charge, may she rest in peace, Bonnie Tischler, who I asked her, how is it that I could get a transfer to the Pacific Northwest? And she's like, Peter Ostrovsky, are you out of your mind? Like, why would you want to go up there? That's like a retirement spot. It's like, if you stay here in South Florida, you're certainly, to become a supervisor. Or she's like, because she was transferring to headquarters to be Ray Kelly's assistant commissioner for enforcement, over investigations. She's like, or you can come with me and some people that I'm taking to headquarters. And I was like, well, I'm really not there yet. I really want to stay in the field and continue working. And the Pacific Northwest is where I want to go. And so I had asked her how to do that, and she's like, well, if those people out there really want you, have their special agent in charge give me a call, and I'll see what I can do. That being said, a couple weeks prior to that, because I was still in our maritime group before I left Miami, and I had been involved in a boat chase and a collision with a smuggler boat, where the smuggler boat collided with us and ended up on top of our boat. And that boat missed me by, I'll tell you, probably 2 feet. I was standing forward on the deck. And when that boat hit us, I fell to the deck and I looked up and I was looking at the underside of that boat. And Mike, I have to tell you that at the time I was holding a shotgun, and I still do not know to this day whether that boat knocked the shotgun out of my hand or I let go of the shotgun and the shotgun went overboard. But we never found that shotgun. We were 30 miles offshore of Miami, 1 a.m. So, I had been almost killed in that pursuit. And so that being said, the special agent in charge, Bonnie Tischler, kind of knew who I was at that point. So when she made that offer, she's like, well, I'll see what I can do. I really didn't expect anything, but I had already met some of the management in Seattle. And I made a phone call out there, and I was like, hey, if you guys are interested in me, the future assistant commissioner told me to tell you to call her. And the next thing I know, I get a letter in the mail, and I'm reassigned to the Blaine, Washington office. So, we move out there. I'm very excited to be out there. Blaine, Washington, it's on the U.S.-Canada border with British Columbia. Back then, it was a very small office. It was 16 special agents. There was 2 investigative groups. There was the drug group and the non-drug group. I land in Blaine, and I'm the new guy. And they essentially wanted to free up all of the guys in the drug group to work like longer term investigations instead of just like these little border hits, border response cases. And I was told right away, it's like, you and this other special agent are basically our border response guys. You handle every border case that comes along. And somebody hearing that would go, oh, that's an awful assignment. Actually, it was an incredible assignment.
Why is that?
Because there's just case after case is coming your way.
Yeah.
And we had all these opportunities to conduct cold convoys, which are like cold surveillances from the border of criminals that or smugglers that had drug loads. Back then, it was the start of the British Columbia marijuana era. BC Bud, high-grade indoor-grown marijuana in Canada that was being smuggled from British Columbia, Canada, down into the West Coast in the United States. High-grade, it fetched about $3,000 a pound in Los Angeles, so it was highly desirable. So my partner and I handled like all of these small cases. We're talking 3 pounds, 5 pounds, 10 pounds. But so we were there like on the ground floor of like all of these border cases. We do controlled deliveries, from the border with these loads, arresting additional individuals downstream that were receiving the marijuana loads. But then it just grew. It exploded. It went from a 10-pound case, which would be worth like $30,000 in Los Angeles, to all of a sudden 70 pounds, $2,100 case. $210,000 case, right? Value of narcotics. Then it went to like from a 70-pound case to like 150, 300 pounds, 600 pounds. So it just proliferated. And so we were there like at ground zero. So it was a great way for me to cut my teeth in this new place. And a lot of these cases were vehicles with hidden compartments, commercial vehicles coming through the ports of entry. Then we started seeing maritime cases. So similar to the smuggling in South Florida from Bimini, we started seeing the smuggling of Canadian marijuana from the Gulf Islands into the San Juan Islands, which is part of Washington State. It's a Washington county that's offshore between us and the Canadian islands. So I really ended up in, it was like great timing to be there, to experience all this stuff, on the ground floor.
Sounds like it. And that's the thing, to our point earlier in the conversation we were having in regards to people not paying attention so much to incidents in Cuba and tensions between Cuba and the U.S. versus tensions between the U.S. and the Balkans in the 90s. Same thing. People are thinking about smuggling through the Mexican border. People are thinking about smuggling through the Miami Cuban border. They're not thinking anything about Blaine, Washington, yet look at what's going on. You wouldn't look at it and think as much was happening, but again, the Canadian-U.S. border being as volatile a place as it can be for smugglers to come in and do their bit, rather it be any kind of contraband, not just drugs or guns, illegal cigarettes, for example, or anything else. Look at how much work was being done. So, again, I can't say this enough. You can never judge a book by its cover because look how busy you were. Right.
And across the border in British Columbia, we had multiple Hells Angels chapters that were involved. We had Indo-Canadian, organizations, which are, Indians that are landed in Canada. There were Vietnamese Canadian organizations that were involved in the smuggling of marijuana. There were just like these homegrown, like what I would call like white guys, Caucasian guys in Canada that were involved in the activity. But what we found out was that the well-established groups they were just using marijuana smuggling as a means to generate revenue inside of the United States, or to have revenue inside of the United States, so that they could interact with Mexican organizations and buy cocaine loads for smuggling cocaine loads into Canada, specifically into British Columbia. And then for distribution in British Columbia and beyond into Eastern Canada, for distribution from British Columbia into the Pacific Rim, into Japan, into Australia, into New Zealand. So what ended up being was that the Canadian DTOs were linking up with the Mexican cartels in the United States. They were using the United States as a bridge to each other. They were using United States highway infrastructure to transport product. They were using United States communications infrastructure, mobile phone networks to communicate, to perpetrate these crimes. And what you got to realize is that, so on the northern border, we have the U.S. Border Patrol essentially looking for southbound traffic from Canada into the United States. But the Canadians don't have their version of a border patrol on their side of the border. So you have the U.S. Border Patrol essentially looking for traffic in both directions, but the northbound traffic is more difficult to interdict. And the reason is this, is that once somebody's smuggling, let's say, a backpack of coke into Canada on foot, once they've set off the let's say there's a trail that the Border Patrol has seismic sensors on, they're gone. They're gone across the border into Canada, and the Border Patrol can't chase them into Canada. So it's very difficult to interdict the northbound between the ports of entry. So the Canadian DTOs were very successful in what they were doing, and but they were not just marijuana organizations. They were like poly-drug organizations, and some of them were just more interested in trafficking of cocaine because that's where the profit was for them.
And again, using the U.S. as a stepping stone, the U.S. wasn't the primary basis for their operations. It was a worldwide level, as you just described. But
Yep.
It's kind of like, again, if you want to go through Boston, if you want to go from New York to Boston or Boston to New York, you cut through Connecticut. You're not interested in stopping anywhere in Connecticut, but you have a destination in mind, but it's a stepping stone. No different here when
Yep.
you're talking about trafficking. Before I move ahead, any dealings, because they were prevalent at this time with trafficking as well. They always have been. Any dealings with the Canadian mob at all in your cases, or not really?
Yeah, I mean, they were involved. They were just one of the many groups that were involved in the business. Prior to the whole BC Bud thing taking off, most of the marijuana or hash loads going into Canada, hashish, were coming across the Pacific Ocean on motherships. And then the Canadian growers realized that they could do this indoor high-grade marijuana grows, and they basically switched. And some organizations still tried to do, Canadian organizations still tried to send like a ship down to South America to pick up like a huge cocaine load and smuggle it into Vancouver Island. But the majority of them figured out that, well, there's a lot of coke right across the border in America that the Mexican cartels and the Mexican groups are bringing in, and we're not challenged going into Canada because there's no Canadian Border Patrol. So they pretty much switched exclusively to doing all their operations through the United States. And you name it, all methods of transportation were being used for smuggling in the Pacific Northwest. Passenger cars, commercial trucks, small boats, kayaks, sailboats, small planes, helicopters. That was all in play. So I was really able to take, everything that I learned in South Florida and apply it up there. And it was literally, I used to call it the new frontier, because it was just like the new area in the United States of concern. And, the other thing was that when we were investigating smugglers, whether they were on boats, planes, or helicopters, it was a thinking man's game. It was not just, hey, here they come. They're coming towards us. They're coming from north to south. There's the smugglers. It could be a smuggler coming down empty to pick up a coke load to smuggle the coke load to Canada. So it was really like a thinking man's game. You had to know what you were looking at, do a lot of surveillance to realize what you had. And you definitely did not want to jump the gun on a smuggler, because you may come up with just an empty vehicle or an empty compartment. So you wanted to kind of let things play out and watch things develop, and then decide what kind of action you're going to take. So it required a lot of surveillance. And, I think, it's still a tried and true investigative technique across the interagency, state, local, federal surveillance, wins the day when
Absolutely.
the bad guys or the smugglers don't know that they're being watched, and we just watch them commit the crime and catch them red-handed. So,
and it's a matter of patience too, because to your point, they're coming in with nothing yet. You know where they're going. It's no secret where they're going, but it's a delicate legal line to walk, because you can't arrest somebody for what they haven't done yet. That's the key to undercover work, successful undercover work. That is, let's watch you actually do it, and then hey, it's like, hey, gotcha, on candid camera, and down they go for the count, and then again, it's right on tape. And if they're smart, they'll take a plea deal. Some aren't, some are. Some fight it, and they end up going to jail for longer. Moving ahead, you make a supervisory special agent in 2000, and a year later, 9/11 hits. Now, 2001 to 2003 is a bit of a whirlwind, because September 11th, 2001 takes place, and it's a ripple effect. Local law enforcement has changed forever, especially in larger cities where, especially New York City, the focus becomes counterterrorism. We mentioned Ray Kelly earlier. When he came back as NYPD commissioner, it's one of the first things that he made it his mission to build the NYPD into, and he did. And federally, of course, the same thing was going to take place, because a lot of people, once the details came out, looked particularly at the FBI and CIA and said, hey, what gives? Why weren't you guys talking to each other? And then, of course, that ripple effect reaches you guys to where 2003, the merger happens between Border Patrol and Customs into what it is now, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, otherwise known as ICE. Some people liked the merger, some people didn't, but obviously it was a necessity for its time, and it's still in place over 20 years later. When it happened in 2003, were you a proponent of it, an opponent of it, or you didn't care?
Because the majority of our work in the Blaine, Washington office was contraband smuggling, drug smuggling. To me, it was like no effect. It's like, okay, now we have these guys from the former Border Patrol anti-smuggling unit who work human smuggling. Mm-hmm. Now they're a part of our office. And it's like, okay, that kind of coincides with what we do, because we're all about pursuing smugglers. So it's like, yeah, these guys are now the experts in the human smuggling side. So to me, it really had not much effect. We also had a lot of good interagency cooperation prior to 9/11, because with the RCMP, with the Border Patrol, and the Customs Service, we had created what was called the Integrated Border Enforcement Team, operating in British Columbia, specifically in that Blaine, Washington, lower mainland of British Columbia area. So we were already working with the Border Patrol. We were already working with Canada Customs and RCMP closely in this team concept. So I think that set us up where the merger wasn't a big deal. If I tell you that when the merger came and ICE, because now they created ICE, and we were part of the ICE Office of Investigations instead of the Customs Service Office of Investigations. The only noticeable thing for me was like, oh, why are we doing time cards now? That was like a Border Patrol or an INS thing where they did time cards. And it's like, we had never done time cards in the Customs Service, because we were like, maybe somebody was doing them in the background, but I never personally had to do one. So when I tell you that administratively, I noticed like this difference, but operationally, we were already operating together as one for quite some time prior to that. So the merger really didn't have any effect. And also, because of BC Bud, the whole advent of the smuggling from British Columbia, our office was already growing prior to 9/11. I mean, we went from a 2-group office. By the time I made supervisor in 2000, there was a 3-group office, and the 3rd group was like an intel group that I was supervising. That was my first supervisory assignment. But then we grew to a 4th, a 5th, a 6th group. Before and during 9/11. So, before and during the merger. So like 9/11 happened, I was the intel group supervisor, but we continued to grow even before the merger because of the whole BC Bud threat, drug smuggling threat on the northern border. So I think we were well established prior to that.
And the border, the merger only helped cement that. So in your case, obviously, it was a boost. And I think across the board, in hindsight, it was, again, necessary for its time. And it's still necessary now, considering a lot of the operations that were going on. And the big thing was national security on all fronts. And unfortunately, it was reactionary. We wish this didn't have to happen in the first place. But if there's any silver linings that came out of such a horrible tragedy, of which the 24th anniversary is in 10 days, hard to believe, it is the emphasis and help that a lot of these law enforcement agencies received. More of an emphasis on interagency collaboration, which was, as you said, already taking place. It was just taking place in a heightened sense after that day. You had a lot of seminal moments in your career. I think one of them is 2005's Operation Frozen Timber, because it was the first of its kind. And here you were, almost 20 years into things. You'd been involved a long time. At this point, you're a supervisor. You hadn't seen everything, but you've been around the block once or twice. So I imagine by this point, nothing really was going to shock you. But nevertheless, this was cool because this was something that, again, was very unique to you, very unique to your group, and led to massive arrest and a CNN feature for positive press, which the agency can always benefit from. So just tell me about what it entailed and ultimately seeing that process through to 46 arrests. And on top of that, massive seizures.
Yeah, well, just prior to Frozen Timber, the first northern border air branch in the Customs Service was established in Bellingham, Washington. And mainly because of all the investigative activity and the threat that had been identified by our group, the maritime threat, the small plane threat in the Pacific Northwest involving the smuggling of drugs. So that new air branch was established. Prior to that, we had some TDY pilots, temporary duty pilots, come up from Sacramento, San Diego. They'd bring up a plane. They would help us with surveillance support. We were super successful. And thus, in late 2004, that air branch was established. Also in late 2004, the former roommate of a target that we had investigated in 1999, we assisted the Canadian provincial law enforcement agency with their investigation of a suspected helicopter smuggler that was smuggling marijuana in a helicopter. We assisted them with their case in 1999. It was kind of like a standalone case. We interdicted a couple of loads off of that helicopter to help the Canadians make their case in Canada. So fast forward to late 2004, the roommate of that pilot from the 1999 case comes to the border. My guys get called. That guy in his car has a satellite telephone, and he has a map for the Okanagan National Forest, which is the national forest which is on the eastern slope of the Cascade Mountains, due east of us. But at that time of the year in the winter, the main road to get over there is actually snowed in. Instead of doing a 2-hour drive, you have to go way south to Everett, Washington, and drive over, and it takes you 5.5 hours to get to that area. So here we have the former roommate of a smuggler pilot with a sat phone with a map for that area. And some of the guys in my group responded up there, followed him, and that was the beginning of Operation Frozen Timber. We essentially determined that in the Methow Valley, which is north of Winthrop, Washington, in U.S. forest land, that's where these Canadian offloaders were meeting helicopters and offloading BC bud marijuana loads. Everything from like a 300-pound load to a 900-pound loads, sometimes in multiple flights in like one morning. And what we determined in our investigation was that some of these offloads could happen in as little as 43 seconds, or maybe as long as 2.5 minutes. So they are happening in these locations in the national forest, locations where it would be very difficult to do surveillance. It'd be very difficult to do air surveillance because you're already at altitude in the terrain in this mountainous forested area. And so it was quite the challenge. But what we determined was that we could use some surveillance technology on these offloaders' vehicles. We started figuring out where the offloaders would rent vehicles, and soon after that, we started discovering the locations in the forest that were in use by these smugglers. And how we confirmed it was we used some remotely activated video surveillance systems in the forest to essentially burn videotape. And every now and then we'd go back out to these locations, we'd pull the tape, we'd watch it, and we'd go, oh, wow, a Robinson R-22 landed here, 2 mornings ago with a sling load of large duffel bags, and he was met by a guy in a minivan, and they conducted an offload. So with that intelligence, we started developing like an enforcement plan on how to take these guys down. But again, it's a thinking man's game. It's the northern border. You have to let things kind of mature and see what's really happening. You just can't jump the gun because you may not get anything. The other thing was there was an inherent danger with trying to interdict a helicopter because already some of the smugglers in Canada had crashed their helicopters. One guy had crashed a helicopter taking his girlfriend for a joyride, and one weekend he actually rolled it over on liftoff and crashed and killed her in a Jet Ranger. So we had to be very careful as to how we were going to go about what we were going to do. And we decided that the best thing was to allow these guys to offload and to follow them out and then do a car stop, or some people call it a roadkill, down the road, and take them off that way and basically let the helicopters go back to Canada. But what we determined was that we needed to, in order to give the operation legs, right, we needed to team up with an appropriate unit, which was our Washington State Patrol, and have them be the marked interdiction unit on the highway. So once CBP got their high altitude surveillance aircraft with a camera system, and it's the same camera system that's on a Predator drone, once we had that plane in place and working for us, we could essentially, after we identified the different landing spots, we would know when something was going to happen, when one of our targets would cross the border, would go acquire a vehicle that would be parked somewhere else, or acquire a rental vehicle. then we would know that, okay, they're headed over to the other side of the mountains to conduct an offload. An offload of what? Or maybe it was an onload, right? It was a load that was going to go to Canada. So it required surveillance. And we would have the high altitude plane watch the area. They would spot a helicopter coming in at first light. You know, in the summertime in the Pacific Northwest, you know, first light is like at 4:30. So it gets it's bright at that time of the morning. You can fly very early. What we also found was that the smugglers were operating like Tuesday to Thursday. They would never conduct smuggling operations on the weekends because that's when all the recreational people were out in the forest, hiking, fishing at mountain lakes and whatnot. So our sweet spot was really to work like Tuesday to Thursday. And our high altitude surveillance plane would watch them conduct the offload, would follow out the vehicle. We would follow the vehicle 3-4 hours down to the interstate. And then we'd have the Washington State Patrol take them off. Being that it was a Canadian helicopter that came from Canada to drop the load, as long as we maintained continuous surveillance of that vehicle, we still had border search authority on that vehicle. But what we did was we had the Washington State Patrol under our authority stop the vehicle. We'd seize the load, but the offloaders did not know that ICE special agents were involved. They thought it was the Washington State Patrol did it by themselves. And what we would ultimately do was we'd have the Washington State Patrol take them back to their station. A couple of our guys would show up and not lie to the smuggler, but just say, hey, we're investigators. We're here investigating this incident, and try to get the guy to talk. 9 times out of 10, they wouldn't talk. We would also try to make the smuggler think that we didn't know that it came off of a helicopter. We'd go, hey, you've got a 600-pound load of marijuana here. Where did you meet the commercial truck that had this load? And so that they would realize that, oh, these guys don't know it came in via a helicopter. And ultimately, we would tell the offloader after leaving him by himself in the detention space, we'd come back to him and go, hey, it's your lucky day. The U.S. The prosecutor said that we can't prosecute you because the troopers did an illegal search. It wasn't an illegal search. They did it under our authority. It was a extended border search. So we would essentially cut the guy loose. But we had his load. We had all the data out of his GPS. We had all the data out of his phone. And we cut the guy loose. And that's how we were able to essentially give that operation legs, by doing that sort of activity over and over again for 18 months. And, we identified about 15 locations that helicopters were offloading to different offloaders and for different groups. So, it was very successful in that nobody had ever in the United States, and U.S. law enforcement had ever worked smuggling via helicopter to that scale like we did, and had that kind of effect, and was able to gather so much intelligence as we were able to gather during that op.
Amazing how many things, and thank you for going into that, how many recurring themes would come up over the course of different topics that we've hit on. We go back earlier to what we talked about with patience, long-term investigation. You know what they're doing. If you're a younger, more inexperienced, more gung-ho agent, you just want to nab a, maybe even an older one. But it takes time to build it that way. When it's time to move in, when it's time to make these apprehensions, the case is ironclad. There's nowhere, legally speaking, for them to go. And for 46 of those individuals, there was nowhere to go. And you've had a lot of satisfying cases in your career, many of which we've been able to talk about so far tonight. I have to imagine that if it's not the case of your career, it's certainly somewhere very close to the top.
Yeah, and I would say not just for myself, because I was a supervisor and I was out in the field with our special agents, but for the special agents that did all the work, They were incredible. It really was like the team of teams to have. Besides being tenacious in their investigations, in their surveillance, these guys would never quit. They would never give up. I coined this term, hey, we're going to follow them to the ends of the earth. And they were like, yeah, okay, we know what you're talking about. But they were incredible interviewers as well. So when we would have a defendant, not in frozen timber, because we didn't want them to know that we knew how they did it, but in other investigations, these special agents that I had, and I'll just give them a shout out with their first names, Jesse, Kevin, Chad, and Ben. They were incredible interviewers. There really was nobody that they could not relate with and get them to roll over and to assist us. I was just so fortunate to have them as part of our team. And then we had other individuals on our team that were like really great at surveillance. We were working in the forest. So one of our special agents was also a Green Beret in the Army. So this guy was highly capable, smart about operating in that kind of environment. We teamed up also with U.S. Forest Service Law Enforcement and Investigations. With their uniform side, they very much kind of showed us what was permissive and not permissive in the force, so that like we brought the know-how of how to do a smuggling case, and the Forest Service brought, okay, this is what we can do in the forest and not do, because the bad guys or the recreational people will notice us. Then we're also very fortunate that we had the air branch, our air resources, and this high altitude surveillance aircraft working with us. So, it really was the team of teams.
Absolutely. And great work and great job to not just yourself, but everybody involved with that to make that happen. Now, 2008 is interesting because, again, major relocation in 1997 from South Florida to Washington. Then you get settled into Washington State, that is, not D.C., with the work that you were doing in Blaine. And then an international relocation very later in your career at that, 2008 to 2011 abroad in the UK, more specifically London. What prompted that? And, again, was it hard, especially from the standpoint of having a family at that time, to say, hey, we got to go not just, to another part of the country, to another country altogether?
Yeah, that's another opportunity of being in federal law enforcement, especially being in one of the larger agencies that have an international footprint, is to go overseas and work overseas. And I think it was time at that point. I had been a field special agent for 13 years before I became a supervisor, which is kind of unheard of. Some people will do like 3-4 years and they become a supervisor. So I'd already been 13 years in the field as a field agent. I had already been 11 years at that point. No, at that point was 8 years as a first line supervisor in the field with the special agents. So what was the next thing to do? Well, I could go to headquarters, but let's try to go international. And, I talked to my wife about it. We had our 2 sons that were 8 years old at the time, and we thought that it was the right time to do something different. Again, embracing the spirit of my dad, who lived around the world. He actually traveled the world. I wanted to do it myself. So the opportunity came to go to London as the deputy attaché, essentially running our investigative and intelligence sharing operations in our office in the U.S. Embassy in London. And we went for it.
And went for it, he did. So in those 3 years being over there and being able to get, again, a feel for the lay of the land, there's a lot going on. It's not just smuggling. Again, I go back to counterterrorism. That was a big thing, too. 2008, when you go over there, we're only 3 years removed from the 7/7 attacks in 2005. Yeah. And a big thing, again, I keep hitting on is interagency collaboration. It's not just the operations there, strengthening the partnerships, building the relationships that you have, particularly as it comes to intelligence sharing. So tell me about networking there and building a whole new roster of contacts to supplement the ones that you had built up stateside in the 21 years you spent there.
Yeah. Well, when I got there, when you get to an office, there's already an existing network. and it's really from the agents that have been there prior to you. So, I was the GS-14 deputy attaché, but then we had 5 GS-13 special agents that were working cases, working what we call collateral cases on behalf of our offices back in the United States that have leads that need to be run in the UK or in the Republic of Ireland or in some of the other British islands. So there's an existing network. So it's really all about maintaining that network, and then programmatically expanding what we're doing with our partners. Now, the United Kingdom, considered America's greatest partner. You'll hear presidents say that over and over again, and they certainly don't now or even in the past need our assistance with investigative technique and tradecraft. They're very good. They're very good. I mean,
Very good.
in everything that they do. You look at the Metropolitan Police Service in London. They have somebody for everything. And I'll give you an example. They'll have like foot surveillance guys. They'll have photographic surveillance guys. They'll have photograph interpreters that look at the footage that's gathered out in the field. I mean, there's so much specialization and perfection of the technique and how they do things, just to mention a few. So they certainly didn't need our help with any of that. But what happens is that as we identify new threats to United States trade and commerce or illegal export threats, etc., we bring them to the attentions of our partners, who will likely have a piece of the pie or a piece of the action, because let's say the activity may be based in their country or it may be transshipped through their country. So we can bring to them awareness of a crime or how the smugglers are smuggling by working with them and bringing them information. And then it works the other way. They'll bring things to us as well. So, in a country like the United Kingdom, we're not doing any hand-holding. And where you may see some of our agents that are working in a lesser developed country in Central America or in Asia or in Africa, and they're actually showing the counterparts how to do the work. In the UK, it's all about maintaining those contacts and amplifying what we can do together. And so, I used to say that our job is to maintain that outpost. Very nice outpost, in the
You can't complain with that one.
in the nicest part of London.
Yeah.
But our job working in the embassy is to keep that outpost running for the servicing of our investigations in the United States by our HSI special agents that need help in Scotland or Wales or the Republic of Ireland or Northern Ireland. So that was really what we did. And I always joke that a lot of what happens there, happens at the bar. You spend a lot of time socializing with your counterparts, and it's almost as if thinking back of a lot of meetings that I would go to, we would meet our counterparts at 2 p.m. in their office, and by 2:20 we had already discussed what we needed to discuss, and it's like, all right, let's go to the pub, and the rest of the business is done over a pint. And I always joke that I learned all about Guinness on that international assignment.
Of course. And that was, again, it's nice to walk into a situation like that and it's not just the UK, there's other countries like this. And I'm not putting down any other lesser developed country. Again, it's important to network with those countries as well. But the work's already, as you said, in progress. It's already being done to the same sophisticated level. It's a first world country. So therefore, again, first world country, first world problems, yes. But some of the problems that you're facing with the third world country and trying to partner with them are not present here. You see that with not just the UK, but with Israel too. You go over there, they have the IDF, they have the Mossad. So they're able to function at that level as well, to where it makes the job a lot easier, because you know you're dealing with a counterpart and an ally at that has the exact same resources you do, just with a different name and just with different laws to follow, which is what ultimately was able to make that partnership so successful. You were only there 3 years. It was an enjoyable 3 years. You came back stateside. And you were active in Blaine. You got the chance to oversee the building of a facility, 26,000 square feet at that, in the Washington area, specifically Ferndale, which I imagine was very nice. And around 2018 is ultimately when, after these 31 years, you decided to call it a day. So long time coming by this point. A lot of work had went into the work that you not only done in Miami, but Washington, London, but again, you were still having a great time. What was it ultimately that made you say, you know what, all right, this chapter of my life was really a lot of fun, but it's time to pack it in?
Yeah, it's a couple things. I came back from London and I became a second line supervisor, which is an assistant special agent in charge. I was responsible for what would be considered a division in Blaine. We had 70 people under our roofs, because we had multiple locations that we had our people in our county. We had like 14 task force officers from state, local, federal agencies. We had RCMP, Canada Customs working in our building. And I did the job as the head of the office. Not that I wanted to, but I felt that I needed to for my family, to get them back into our house in Bellingham, Washington. And then also the former special agent in charge wanted me to come back because he wanted me to try to bring the Blaine office back to where it had been prior to my departure, which some of that is possible and some of that is impossible, because the bad guys always have a vote, right? The smugglers are always changing what they do. So what was successful for us during frozen timber may not be successful in present day. So, I went back to Blaine, and after a while, I realized that it was important to get our people under one roof, because we had our people spread out in 4 different locations inside of one county. It was kind of absurd. And so I started working on developing the requirements for a new building, and I was successful in that, and I got that approved before I retired, although I never worked in it because I was gone by the time they started construction. But our guys working in HSI and Blaine and working under the auspices of our Border Enforcement Security Task Force were essentially the go-to for border-related criminal investigations in the area. And they needed a building that matched their mission and matched their responsibility and their profile. So I was able to get that building approved for them before I left. But I really left because it was kind of timing. I felt like there wasn't much more that I could get my arms around at that point in my career, 31 years. I was 54. Mandatory retirement for us is 57. And my boys, who were fraternal twins, were graduating from high school that year. And we really wanted to do a move with them to somewhere where, honestly, that there was a little bit more sunshine. Most of the time in the Pacific Northwest, it's gray and drizzly, except for a few months in the summertime. So we chose Central Oregon on the east side of the mountains, and we moved down there. At the same time, I was hired by a local community college here in Bend, Oregon, to be the director of public safety. So I was up for that challenge and up for a new challenge, which was serving the needs of a small community, which is a community college. And I felt that some of the emergency management experience that I developed and the training that I received towards the end of my career as a division head, I could apply that to this new job and this new mission in Oregon.
And again, I like how you put that, a new challenge. After so many years being involved in so many different things, I imagine it was an attitude that you were eager to take on. I love how you mentioned, I'm not clowning Washington, but there's a reason they call Seattle Rain City, because, specifically growing up watching Cops episodes that they would film in Pierce County primarily, because stuff was always happening in Pierce County. The common theme I would ask myself in these episodes, these reruns from the 90s are on YouTube in their entirety, is it ever sunny? Why is it always overcast over there? And I guess you just explained why. This I did want to touch on a couple of years after this. Jack, one of your twins, went into the Marine Corps, which is not any branch of the military you get into. I have friends I work with who are military vets, and it's not easy. The training, no matter the branch, is intense. It takes a lot out of you physically, it takes a lot out of you mentally. And he made it into the Marine Corps. Before we get to, of course, the tragedy involving him, just tell me when he said, because it's always jarring for any parent to hear, hey, I think I want to go into the military. When he said he wanted to go into the Marines, what was you and Mrs. Ostrovsky's first reaction?
We're happy for him. We're proud of him for making that decision. He started going to the local community college here in Bend, and he was an uncommitted freshman on Army ROTC, because Oregon State University is also in Bend, and they have an Army ROTC program that's shared with the community college. So Jack was over there as an uncommitted freshman. He'd gone on a couple of field training exercises, and I remember him coming back, and he was just raving about how much fun it was to be in these scenarios or this field training exercise that was like, it's the infantry, they were like in some location in Astoria, Oregon, which, believe it or not, there's rain up there because it's on the west side of the mountain. So he came back, soaked, dirty, and with a smile on his face, raving about the infantry and whatnot, and how much he loved it. So when he told us that he wanted to enlist and become a Marine, he basically put it this way. He goes, I want to learn the job before I'm leading others in doing the job and telling them how to do the job. He goes, I don't want to continue on at college and with Army RTC. And we're like, great, that's fine, because it kind of fits the parameters of what I call the meal deal. It's moral, ethical, affordable, and legal. Something that I learned from a RCMP officer that told me that a long time ago. And so we 100% supported him in his decision. And I think it was part of him embracing that Ostrovsky spirit that, his grandfather was a self-made man when he came to the United States. I essentially became a self-made man inside of my organization, working my way up from the bottom to where I ended up. And he wanted to do the same. So that was that resonated with us, and we had no issues with it whatsoever.
And he ended up becoming a lance corporal in the Marine Corps, so his rise was very quick. And in this summer of 2020, when a lot was already going on, a lot in the country, both with the pandemic and other well-documented matters, comes that tragedy. No parent should ever have to bury a child, and I'm very sorry that you went through that. But just dealing with that, and of course advocating in the aftermath of something like that. It was a training accident that unfortunately took Jack away from us. Just tell me about carrying on his legacy, carrying on his memory, and what you want people to know about who he was and how we can avoid situations like the one that unfortunately took him away from us.
Yeah. So Jack was killed in training on July 30th of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. He was killed with 8 others when their amphibious assault vehicles sank off of San Clemente Island, California, as they were trying to return from San Clemente Island to the USS Somerset, which is a Navy amphibious ship, which, by the way, the Somerset is named after Somerset County, where Flight 93 crashed. So that's its nexus to 9/11. So, we were devastated, and I mean, in a way, we still are, because we saw Jack as the next leader of our family, and so, and he had a very bright outlook and a bright future, and um, he didn't have to enlist. He wanted to enlist. He wanted to become a Marine, and he was already talking about making it his lifelong career because it was his calling. So, when it happened, we were destroyed. Destroyed our future plans that we had at the time, and we were, at a certain point, I was like, wow, I served my country for 31 years. He was trying to create his own path and serve his country. And so, yeah, it was just very tragic for all of us. Disappointed in a sense that his life was cut short the way it was. And then, the investigation showed that there was a lot of negligence, a lot of lack of leadership. And, as somebody that became a leader in my old organization, it was clear to me that there was a lack of duty of care. And some of the officers were, playing Russian roulette with the lives of the junior Marines by cutting corners, skipping training, assigning poor conditioned vehicles, amphibious assault vehicles that were essentially administratively deadline. They should not be used, yet they were forced to use those vehicles. And it's just a tragic situation for our family and the 8 other families and their fellow Marines to see that happen. It's just it's been awful. So I've been vocal. I looked at, because you can imagine that they conduct an investigation. This is considered a Class A mishap, where there's a loss of life, loss of equipment, and the investigation showed, just like I said, a lot of corner cutting. They didn't complete the appropriate training. The maintenance on the vehicles was poor. In the fact that they had poor conditioned vehicles to begin with, and then they tried to use them and tried to bring them up to a condition for use, and so the vehicle ultimately sank because of a transmission fluid leak, because on those vehicles the transmissions power some of the bilge pumps. The vehicle's headlight gasket was installed backwards, so water was coming in, and ultimately, the vehicle had too much water inside of it, and the bilge pumps could not keep up, and the vehicle sank. And then most of the 9 of them were actually found on the bottom of the ocean floor at 365 feet under the water, and they weren't recovered for about 12 days because they had to bring in specialized equipment to recover them and the vehicles. So the whole thing was tragic and very painful, and it's still very painful to our family. But I found in some of the investigative reports, investigative interviews, just like it was just a broken unit, a broken organization. I looked at their pre-confirmation briefing, which is like a operational brief prior to the exercise, and on the risk assessment, there was no mention whatsoever that they were using these poor conditioned vehicles. There was no mention whatsoever that they hadn't completed the required training to be in those vehicles. as embarked troops. The only mention in the risk assessment was that somebody could get run over by one of those vehicles in the well deck on board the ship or while on land on the island. So, when I looked at that, being, an experienced special agent who's written operational plans, approved operational plans, and I see that kind of boilerplate, I'm like, man, there's either like a lack of duty of care, or they're not qualified to assess risk, or it's just like a cover-up of their lack of preparedness and readiness. So, the whole thing was very disappointing to us, especially to see that in black and white, and it still is. I mean, they basically let us down, and they let Jack down, and they let the other 8 down. The other 7 Marines and the Navy corpsmen that were killed. They were all let down by their leadership, principally because of neglect. Yeah.
And that's the troubling theme that you see across either national service or even civil service. For as great as the fire service or law enforcement can be, for example, you see this here stateside. Unfortunately, certain agencies are very reactive, and it takes tragedies like this where people are either seriously injured and never the same, or they die, they are killed, and it didn't need to happen. That's the common theme. Majority of these situations, when you analyze them, 95% of these situations where there is a loss of life in the line of duty, as you just touched on, they're preventable. And it takes, unfortunately, individuals, like I said, having to get hurt, having to get killed for people in charge of these organizations to ultimately say, oh, yeah, we should fix that. It should not take that. It should never take that. And I guess that's the point of the advocacy, too. And again, we talked earlier about silver linings. This should have never happened in the first place. But if there is going to be a silver lining in such an awful situation, it's the advocacy and making sure, hey, be on top of your equipment. It shouldn't even have to be said, and it's sad that it does, but be on top of your equipment. Watch what type of fleet you're handling and sending out there, because you don't want members operating in these type of conditions where it can prove fatal.
Yeah. And so, I testified by before the House Armed Services Committee subcommittee on readiness. I've testified there. I was interviewed by Leslie Stahl in 60 Minutes several years ago in a segment called Death in Training, that talked about not just the AAV incident, but rollover incidents in the various branches of the military, whether it would be a small wheeled vehicle or an armored vehicle with wheels. So trying to do my part, speak out where the opportunities present themselves. But, I have to say that, and I'm not sour about it, but it's just the way it is that I think we lost some of our steam talking about readiness 13 months later during the tragic deaths at Kabul.
Yes.
So we had our own steam calling for readiness and improvements in the Marine Corps, and then 11 Marines, an Army soldier, and a Navy corpsman are killed in Kabul, and the spotlight shifted to that. And it seems that despite everything that was identified in the investigation of Jack's incident, the Marine Corps really didn't take it to heart, because, they replaced the AAVs, which were essentially Vietnam era vehicles that were refurbished over decades. They replaced them with this new amphibious combat vehicle, very similar, but it's wheeled instead of tracked. But yet it appears that the operators of that amphibious combat vehicle still don't have the blue water competency that they need to have to operate in the ocean, because since then they've had 3 incidents off of the California coast where they've lost 3 of those vehicles, mainly due to going out in like high surf, which there's anybody that has any kind of blue water competency knows you shouldn't be going out in high surf in those kinds of vehicles because they'll roll over if they go abroad to the a beam to the waves. They'll roll over very easily. Luckily, in those incidences, no lives were lost, but they lost 3 vehicles. So, yeah, I mean, you just hope that they will do better and not put others at risk. And, Mike, I'm convinced that I know who Jack was, and I know who he was going to be. And I knew that at his level and wherever he ended up in the Marine Corps, he was going to make it a better place. But I just never thought that it would be like this by him losing his life.
And again, I cannot, and I speak for producer Victor and all of us watching tonight, we cannot say how sorry enough we are that you had to experience that. No parent should ever have to experience that. I do understand, and I know hindsight's 2020, but this is, as we talked about, this is just ridiculous. I do understand training individuals who are getting into the military or the police force or the fire department to learn to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. It is part of the job, but there's a fine line where that crosses into this is just unnecessary and this is just unsafe. And that was one of those situations where unfortunately it did. And I'm glad that you've been so outspoken about it. And I hope that, like you said, and you couldn't have said it any better, that they do get better from this so that we don't have tragedies like this, and we don't have talented individuals and determined individuals ripped away when they don't need to be. It's a dangerous thing to get into. It's not an easy thing to get into. Let's not make it any more dangerous than it needs to be with situations that are entirely avoidable.
Yeah, and there's nothing that I can do, good or bad, that's going to bring Jack back.
Right.
But I can be vocal to work towards it not happening again. But what I've come to realize is that, now that I find myself as a Gold Star parent, is to help other Gold Star parents and families wherever I can. And that opportunity came to me after Kabul, because there's an organization called the Brothers in Arms Foundation. They have a Raider Air service where they provide free logistical support and air transportation to Marines and their families during tragedies like the one that Jack was involved in. And also they will bring groups of Marines to different memorial services. And that organization brought 50 Marines to Jack's memorial service in Bellingham, Washington in August of 2020. So when Kabul came, I had already helped them raise money for their organization by taking the stage at one of their fundraisers in March of 2021. And so when Kabul happened, they contacted me and asked me if I would help them do law enforcement coordination, because they were going to, again, bring a large group of Marines to as many of the Kabul funerals as they could. And of course, I said yes. It gave me the ability to use my know-how of interacting, with law enforcement at all levels to help them do this coordination in all the cities that we're going to bring Marines to. So we actually went on a 5-city trip and to 5 of the funerals, and then we did 2 more funerals in separate trips. So, I find myself where, the Brothers in Arms Foundation helped my family, and now I'm helping them help other new Gold Star families. So that's what I'm focused on now.
Thank you very much for that. You've done a lot. You've gone through a lot, and we appreciate you taking the time this evening to share your story with us. This was a fantastic episode, and we'll end as we always do. As you know the show by now, you know what's coming. It's the rapid fire.
Yeah.
5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. The most, I won't even ask you the first one because I've been seeing this a lot lately, and I don't mind it because when guests are telling great stories, it helps. The first question, rapid fire, was going to be most memorable case you ever worked, but I think Frozen Timber kind of covers that in spades. Yeah. So I'll move on to the next one. A lot of tough moments in your 31-year career where you had to put your thinking cap on. Second question, rapid fire. What would you say was the toughest moment that either prior to you becoming a supervisor or post you becoming a supervisor, you found yourself saying, damn, I really got to figure out a way to get through this?
Well, I think you're not going to be surprised when I say this, that, after being a field special agent for 13 years, after being a second line supervisor for 11 years, probably the toughest was leaving the field and becoming a second line supervisor and being stuck in the office and essentially going into management and being an administrator.
I could see why. You loved the field, and it shows in the stories that you told tonight. Besides London, because London was pretty darn rewarding, what would you say was the most other rewarding assignment or posting you had over those 31 years?
Believe it or not, being a second line supervisor, because I was able to have a larger impact than just working with 10 special agents. I was able to work and influence and assist and mentor, an office full of 70 people. So as much as that was my least favorite assignment, it ended up being probably the most rewarding, especially after being able to get our HSI Blaine organization, a purpose-built 26,000 square foot federal criminal investigative building to measure up with their profile and their role, in the Pacific Northwest.
Absolutely. Again, it's going to be 4 questions instead of the usual 5. So third of the 4 questions, second to last. One tool or skill every young agent should master, in your opinion?
It's communication, verbal, written communication, but especially communication, verbal communication, knowing how to talk to people, knowing how to listen and understand both inside of your organization, outside of your organization with their partners, and with the subjects and the victims and the citizens on the street. You need to know how to communicate with them.
It's important. I always go back to something Bill Bratton called it, former LAPD, Boston, and New York City police commissioner, verbal judo. And he's right. That's the most appropriate term for it, verbal judo. Final question in rapid fire. What it means to have served and continue serving before and after the badge?
It's transformational. I mean, it transforms your life and that of others when you help others. There's just no doubt. And it's a way of life, too. It becomes a way of life. And I never imagined, when I was a Miami Beach lifeguard, that I'd end up where I did. But it has certainly transformed my life and has, when I look at it, Mike, everything that I have, every tangible thing that I have is because of my career. Every experience as an adult because of my career. And people say, oh, well, didn't you experience things with your wife and your family? I'm like, yeah, well, the career gave me the means to experience things with my family and to have things and to enjoy things and to travel. But I owe everything to my career. And that's why I am committed to, wherever I can, to mentor current HSI special agents that are in the ranks and to give back. I'm part of our Retired Agents Association. We have an association of customs and HSI special agents. I'm on the board of directors. I feel very strong about that. Our organization does employee recognition for current HSI employees, and we do tragedy assistance. So because I want all of those current employees to experience what I experienced. I want them to be as satisfied with their career as I was satisfied with mine when I walked away. And you only get one shot to do it. So if there's anything that I can do to help somebody to take the best shot, I'm all in.
I think I can speak for everybody tonight when I said you made the most of your shot, my friend. You cashed in big time. You hit the 3-pointer at the buzzer to win the championship in Game 7 of the finals, and it showed tonight in the conversation that we had. This was awesome. Stick around. We're going to talk off air, so don't say goodbye just yet. But before, as always, and you know this too, but from watching the program, before I say goodbye to the audience, any shout outs to anyone or anything that you have, Pete, the floor is yours.
Oh, well, certainly to Bob Starkman and Alex Alonso and Miles and the others. It's interesting, the Miami office was so big, yet we would work with each other every now and then. It just depended. I ended up not being in a group working directly with those guys, but I had opportunities to work with them. And certainly what you learn from each other is develops you as a special agent. So, I really would like to thank them for letting me be in close proximity to them and hearing everything that they were doing. And then, even to Joe Pistone, when I went to undercover operative school, he was our guest instructor, and I was wet behind the ears, young special agent, and I learned a lot from Joe and was able to apply some of that stuff when I had the opportunity to work undercover. So, and thank you to you, Mike, for giving all of us a voice. And because I think the more people hear about what they do, it'll inspire others to answer the call. They may doubt whether that this is for them or not. And I think it inspires those that are looking to pursue a law enforcement career or any other high-risk career when they hear stories like that. And platforms like yours certainly do that. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for helping people out there that we don't even know.
Thank you very much. That means a lot. I appreciate it. It's never lost on me how much of an honor it is to do this show for one of those very reasons. We'll keep on doing it. Producer Victor and I always have stuff that we're cooking up, conversations like this being the main goal. And we're certainly glad that you got a chance to be a part of that tonight and share so much with us. The pleasure was all ours. The pleasure, of course, was also the audience's by extension. Like I said, stick around. We'll talk off air. For those of you that tuned in tonight, as always, my many thanks to you. Producer Victor, as always, great job on the ones and twos, my friend. I appreciate you very much as well. So coming up next in the Mike New Haven podcast, as I alluded to at the end of last episode with Commissioner O'Connor, this individual was heavily involved in New York City EMS pre-FDNY merger and was a part of the transitional team during that merger in the spring of 1996. So I'm really, and we've talked about it before in the program, but I'm really going to get an inside look at how that merger went down and the semantics involved behind the scenes to making it official in the spring of 96. And then she was involved in intelligence operations for the CIA from 1991 until 2002. So really during the crescendo of the war on terror pre-9/11 and post-9/11. And that will be Kim Woodward, who will join me for Volume 20 of the Beat Profiles of Police Nationwide next Monday. Bill Gross is the guest for this Friday's volume of the Best of the Braves interviews with the FDNY's elite. Both of those shows, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For those of you listening on the audio side, for tonight's outro song from their 1987 album, Music for the Masses, Depeche Mode makes their return to the Mike the New Haven podcast with the song Nothing. In the meantime, on behalf of retired Special Agent Pete Ostrovsky, all of you in the audience, and producer Victor, I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. This has been Volume 19 of The Beat, Profiles of Police Nationwide.